Coming up on this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast.
At your core, what do you think has been the reason why you're seeing success out there?
These are two, probably not the most altruistic answers, but some of it is spite. There's a couple of people along the way that have told me that I'm a fad and it's never going to work out. Treat people like you're going to run into them in 10 years' time. If you treat people like a commodity, then you'll get the exact same respect in return.
Welcome to the Elite Recruiter Podcast with your host, Benjamin Mena, where we focus on what it takes to win in the recruiting game. We cover it all from sales, marketing, mindset, money, leadership, and placements.
I'm excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast. Our guest did $1.6 million in his company in his first year of business. But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the lessons he learned now that he's on year 2. He has done multiple other interviews, and I highly recommend to go check out every single one of those. One, they're great podcasts, and two, he talks about different lessons that he learned at those points in time. But I'm excited to have him on here, so that way we can talk about the lessons that he learned going into year 2 of Hampton North. So Stuart Mitchell, I'm excited to have you. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Been looking forward to this one for a while.
So real quick, before we start doing a deep dive in your background, can you tell the audience and the listeners that don't know you a little bit about yourself in Hampton North?
Yeah, so Stuart Mitchell. I'm British. I've lived in the US for 10 years. I spent some time in New York City, Southern California, now based in Central Connecticut. I founded Hampton North. By the time this podcast goes out, probably 2 years to the day. I founded it in the first week of September of 2022, really to serve the cybersecurity community. Essentially, I know a lot of companies who have a cybersecurity practice or it's a small part of their business. I really wanted to create a home for the cybersecurity community, but also the very best cybersecurity recruiters to work in a place where that business is front and center, not just bolted onto an area of the business. So 2 years in business, we're 5 headcount, slowly growing, but growing at the right pace and really excited.
Awesome. So let's dive in. Okay. Listening to some other podcasts, me doing some homework on you, before you got into recruiting, and I wanted you to tell the story, but you got fired, 9 times?
Yes. So going back a long way, right? So 14 or 15, very sharp, intelligent child, thankful for my parents in terms of the intellect that they passed down onto me. I didn't do much with it. And, 14, 15, the letters coming through the door with Oxford and Cambridge. By the time I'd finished my exams, I'd found women, alcohol, cars, sports, anything that didn't help my career. And I ended up not going to college and finding myself a little bit lost. So I, in my hometown, I kind of bopped around. I did every job possible. And just, the problem is that I had this potential, but I just couldn't find it. And given I had no qualifications, there was really not the right type of jobs to really use that mental output. So I got fired a bunch. I'm lucky I didn't, fall into any worse trouble than the fact that I couldn't keep a job. But yeah, there's people that whenever I go home, I run into, I'm like, hey, you fired me, you remember? So, you see it a lot, right? It happens in sports, it happens in education, right? Folks who if they can't harness their potential. And sometimes you even see it in staffing agencies, right? Like those folks who are not harnessed and channeled the right way, they become a distraction and they become toxic. And if I look back, I was young. This all happened before I turned 23. So it happened a bunch while I was a kid. But yeah, I couldn't keep a job. Wasn't stable. And then, finally found recruitment, which really kind of built the platform for stability for me.
And how did you end up finding about recruiting? Did you just fall into it like all of us?
Yes. Essentially, there's a guy who still works in talent acquisition now back in my hometown. He's had a fairly decorated career. I guess maybe 5 or 6 years older than me. And it's going to sound very British, but I was just heading to a cricket match. And this guy must have been 25, 26 at the time, picked me up in this brand new BMW. And I'm like, hey, what do you do that you have this car? And he's like, I work in recruiting. And I'm like, can you hire me? That sounds sick. I want to do that. I want a brand new BMW. And so he referred me to a friend of his who focused more on the entry-level piece. They're a little bit more kind of exec search based, but a friend of his was hiring entry-level talent. So fell into it somewhat strategically, but not really. Just knew it was a way to make a good living. I didn't really know too much about it. And then, found my first job in my hometown, Northampton, which is where Hampton North comes from. Did that for about 8 to 9 months and then realized that the bigger and better kind of global international opportunities were in London. So in 2012, I would say picked up my first, big boy job in in London, and I went down there, and the rest is history.
And about when during your timeline did you end up in the United States?
So I was only in London for a couple of years. I moved to New York when I was, looking back, I was very young. I was 24. I'd never been. And, at the time I had an American love interest, which made things a little bit more. It was wrapping up their studies in the UK. And so I started speaking to my current employer. I started interviewing at some other places, and my current employer transferred me to New York. And that's really where I think my career, it really kind of kicked forwards. So 2014 was when I made that jump to the US.
I mean, you could have easily stayed in your hometown for at least in London, and everything I think would have worked out for perfectly. Like outside the love interest, why did you actually make the jump over to this side of the pond?
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons. So the first thing is my dad blazed a similar trail. My dad is from New Zealand. He moved to the UK. And so I think that kind of itchy feet syndrome of hey, this is a great opportunity. My hometown London's not going anywhere. What's the worst that can happen, right? The worst thing is it sucks and in 6 months you go home. But, I think some people, when they have large families and whatnot, they all are compelled to stay because everybody stays and it's what they do. I think, having someone in your corner, like a parent who's why would you not do that? That sounds amazing. And my mum also is very supportive. But having someone who blazed that trail just made it a lot easier. I feel like a lot of people have unnecessary and unfair pressures from parents, from siblings, from love interest, whatever, to not be able to take opportunities like that. So I think I had the right support system. And then with the best will in the world, I think, my friendship group, it's a much more diluted version of Goodwill Hunting, where they were I obviously don't have that level of juice, but they're if you stay, you've let us all down. So I do think my friends know that I was always kind of destined to do something bigger and better and more exciting. And they fully supported it, right? They were kind of if I was still there, they'd be hey, you failed. You let yourself down. So having a friendship group that were fully behind me going in and kind of chasing what I needed to chase is super, I'm super grateful for that.
I want to go back in a bit and talk about the UK versus US recruiting market, but fast forward. So New York, California, you're now in Connecticut.
Yeah.
When did you launch your own firm? And I guess, how'd you get to that point of hey, I'm going to go create my own business?
I'd made the decision, I think, probably with about a year before I left my kind of previous place. I'd kind of made the decision that there was nowhere really for me to go from a growth perspective. So I'd got as high as I could from a promotion perspective. There were things that I wanted to do differently that a much wider business didn't want to do. And the reality is it was their business. My job was to make recommendations. If they didn't want to follow them, that's absolutely fine. And they're a very successful business, and, whatever will be. But I think, the reality is, my priorities changed. I think what I am super motivated by now is to create a legacy. It's kind of hard to do that under somebody else's umbrella. I think the other thing is, and this is the financial chaser in me, is there comes a time where, I built such a profile that I felt like I became the show. That may have come with a certain level of arrogance, but the reality is within my domain, I was so well known that it almost was, I think a lot of people were surprised that I didn't own the firm because of how much I cared and because I really did enjoy working there. But I think people assumed because of my passion and dedication for that business that I was at the very least a partner, and I wasn't. And when people are saying that to you, it's okay, well, maybe I can do this. And so I started to have those thoughts. And, the reality is it's not easy. And we'll kind of get into this. So I probably took for granted some of the things that happen in the shadows of a recruiting business that maybe, when you're business facing and team facing, a lot of stuff that does happen that keeps you up at night at times. And that is a lot more to think about. But I just think it was time for me to, if you can't create the change that you want to be, and I interviewed with some other companies that I don't think were as impressive as where I was working previously. So I was if I'm going to work for a company, I'm going to stay here. But ultimately, I wanted to kind of blaze my own trail and do things my way. And hey, if I'm wrong and things don't play out, I'm fairly confident that somebody would hire me given my background and network and experience. But I think I can make a run at this. And I think where I'm seeking legacy, where I'm seeking flexibility, where I'm seeking freedom, these are things that having my own farm enables me to do.
Well, looking back on that, I know you've had some conversations with people. It was a magic mailbox that Stuart was bringing in business. Is there anything that they could have done to keep you?
Maybe I try not to kind of dwell on that. I think like the reality is it was a wonderful 5 years, and I look back on it and I'm super grateful for what they gave to me, and I'm fairly certain that they're pretty happy with what I gave to them. I think it was one of those things, and candidly, I had this discussion where I, like maybe 8 or 9 months before, I was like, this just kind of feels like it's coming to its natural conclusion, and it did. So I think it's one of those things, maybe, but I also think like, would they have enjoyed what it might have taken to keep me? Like, I may have made some other people very uncomfortable, and so there's a lot of kind of metaverse type examples where things are very different right now. But I think, on both sides, I'm certain that they're over it now, and I've kind of moved on, and I'm blazing my own trail, as I say.
And I want to get past the starting point, because you've actually did a lot of really good interviews, like focusing on the starting point. But
yeah,
is there one or two good stories from your launch that either like helped you like come off, like start successfully, or that lesson that you learned that could help somebody else launch right?
Yeah. I think this is one I preach often, but money in the bank versus invoices out and handshake deals are two very, very, very different things for first-time founders. I think as a sales manager or as a director, you're like, okay, well, I know this is coming in, so I'm going to hire 3 people, or I'm going to run this event, or I'm going to go on this travel. When you're watching the accounts receivable, or you're waiting for how long it actually takes to get paid as a recruitment owner, those things are very different. And so I think the reality is, just like, it's such a cliche, but cash is king. Take care of your bank balance. The second is, I think, be very, very, very clear on what is a long-term profitable structure from a hiring perspective. And what I mean by that is whether you operate in a draw, whether you work on commission only, whether you're, base plus salary plus benefits, which is, base plus commission plus benefits, which we are. We pay very well, and we do that so that we can attract very high talent. But at some point, I had to make some tweaks in later stages, which is not what you want to be doing, because I was too generous, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, I'm not running ended up running a not-for-profit for a little bit, even though we were billing, because we're too generous around commission, because I wanted to do better. But you still have to make profit as a business. You've got to remember that there's tax implications and insurance and lots of other things that are more expensive than maybe you consider as an individual contributor. So really just make sure that you have crunched your numbers to make sure that you're going to be a profitable business, because otherwise your hand gets forced and you don't want to be making tighter decisions. So that's definitely one. And then I think I was probably early on too flattered that people wanted to work for me. In my head, we're this like nothing, 2, 3, 4, 5 person company. And so I'm like, okay, well, why are people reaching out to work here? Like, of course, like, would love that, etc. And, the reality is we have some incredible people, and we have some unbelievable clients, and we have, a really good culture here. And so, again, on that mark of being too generous, etc., I don't think you need to be, as a new founder, you don't need to be flattered. People are always going to push the envelope in terms of what's in it for them. But I think the reality is, like, if you're creating a first-class business, which is a lot of effort, I think, the reality is you're paying your people well, you're taking care of them. You don't need to be flattered, and keep giving. And I think, particularly during that post-pandemic boom where recruiters were so kind of sought after, and, everything streets were paved with gold for them, I think there was a lot of kind of giving, because everyone was billing stupid numbers. So you could kind of be too, like, exceptionally generous because your businesses were making so much money. But you don't need to be like over generous and be flattered when people want to work for your company. It's a business relationship, and you're giving them a good opportunity, but you have to expect a lot in return.
If you have not following Stuart Mitchell on LinkedIn, make sure to go click and follow. You're absolutely incredible with LinkedIn. I know you've been playing the LinkedIn game for a long time, and you've mentioned a few times that people were reaching out to you to work for you. Your current team right now is a team of killers.
Yeah.
How did you even go about finding like a team of killers?
So these are people that actually I was trying to hire for a very long time. These are folks within my network. So if we go kind of start to the recent, like Ruby is someone who I'd connected. I worked with one of her peers previously. She reputationally was just off the charts, unbelievable. And so just wanted to work together. So she reached out when I was traveling to California, and it was just a match made in heaven. So that worked out. James was somebody I've been speaking to for 3, 4, 5 years. Couldn't make it work where I was previously. So, he was one of the first people I wanted to call. And so got him over. Ross, very similar situation. He's probably been on my, like, wanted to work for me for 6 years. He's that impressive. And I finally got him on the right day. And then Hoda is someone who we've kind of been ships passing in the night in terms of who we know and who we potentially worked with. But she's, very experienced. She's helping build out a new market for us, a market that is kind of partner aligned in terms of what we're trying to achieve. And just from a DNA and ethos perspective, we were speaking maybe for 7 or 8 months before it happened. And it just kind of felt right. So these are not knee jerk. We're not like waiting for somebody to come in or anything like that. Like, we know who we want here. There's, 5 or 6 people that I think are on the list, essentially, of people that I want to be here. We might not get everybody, but I think we'll get 2 or 3 more of folks. And look, you're right. And I think it's strange, right? Because I think people assume that if they come here, that their job is going to be easier. And that's why some people reach out. I don't believe that. I think, like, recruitment is hard, right? And you don't just go to an agency and it's like, bang, I've got 100 job orders because I work for Hampton North or whoever, right? It's wherever you go comes with its own unique challenges. I think the culture and the expectations here are very different. I think, like, the reality is, I won't let standards slip. I'm such a stickler for high standards. And I think, like, quality of work is probably prioritized over output as long as the input is there. We're not a volume shop. The way we treat the market is so important. And that's why, like, our response rates from cold outreach and from networking messages, etc., is a lot higher. I'm not saying that. And higher doesn't always mean that you pull a job or you pull a client, but I think we operate on a respect basis with the way that we work with the community. And so, like, we expect, like, 1 in 10 emails, people come back to us and just say, hey, look, we have our handle on this, or, like, that's probably not what we need, or something like that. Like, we expect, like, a kind of a 10% return rate on our cold outreach because of the reputation that we have. And if you can just get that right, it does make life easier. But the reality is, you don't just walk into a desk full of hot jobs. And I think some people assume that if they come here, that recruitment will be easy again. We've had our struggles. We had a very difficult Q2. And, the reality is, we sat down and the first week of July, we had some very frank conversations, and, we're seeing the benefits of it now. But, recruitment is still very hard. It doesn't matter where you go. There is no silver bullet. It's just around the people. You just want to be working with great people, and who you surround yourself with is really going to be the output that you get.
Okay, so for the listeners, all these people, like, your entire team is 100% remote.
Yes.
How are you, like, tracking, like, how do you, like, KPIs, metrics, how do you build a high performance remote team?
Yeah. So the first is hire people that actually want to do the job, because I would fathom that, like, 70% of people in our industry just, like, don't know what else to do, so they're just here. And if there's a chance for them to, slack off, they'll do it. Like, if they can get away with stuff, they'll do it. If they can push some KPIs to make themselves look busy, they'll do it. Regardless of, the stats and the KPIs and whatever, I have to trust them that, like, they're doing their job, right? Which I do, right? And that's something that is super important. In terms of internal communications, we're always in Slack. We have our own channels. We have 3 weekly cadence calls as a collective. It's difficult. We run across 8 hours of different time zones, so we have those challenges. But the reality is, those cadence calls are important. We set ourselves weekly pledges. We converse about how we're getting on against those. We share winning moments, whether that's, great client meetings, whether that's a new job pulled, whether that's a candidate going to a final, whether that's a buyback from a spec of a client that we've been trying to get. We share a lot of those collective wins, and that's so important. But you can have all the stats in the world, but you can type anything you want into the system unless I spend my whole time really, really in-depth, like, reviewing. That is not the business leader that I want to be. I've had to do that with one of the team, and I said, look, if I ever have to do this again, this is not going to work, because that is not the leader that I want to be, that I have to review such things under a microscope. I want to be reviewing improvements. I want to be looking at data saying, hey, anytime you get 4 first interviews, your fill rate goes from 50 to 85%. Go and get 4 first interviews. Like, that's the kind of data that I want to be looking at. I don't want to be looking at, are you doing your damn job? Like, I want to be looking at it like, okay, well, you're billing 400, 500. If we can just tweak these 3 things, we can move that to 575, 600. And so that's really the kind of way that we look at it. And it's all underbuilt on trust. And, like, I want it where almost the team are kind of, they do the management for me, right? If you have a team of high performers, like Michael Jordan didn't let someone else make a bad pass or a bad shot, right? Like, the players would look at them without having, what's Phil Jackson didn't have to say like, hey, this is what you need to do. Like the best players should just like, if someone's not doing their job, they should just look at them and say, hey, what the are you doing? And if not, like if you're not doing your job, you need to kind of, like I say it quite brutally, if you don't want to be here, like don't be here. But if you want to be here, like I can make this the very best place in the world to work. But we're having we've had offsites in New York, Los Angeles, Boston. We do this quarterly, Las Vegas. We're doing our holiday party in London this year, which is, huge for a US team. So when we get together, it's deliberate, it's exciting. We really enjoy each other's company and we definitely don't want to lay each other down. But, the standards are set and it's a great place to work. But if you're phoning it in, like it's not going to work out.
How do you handle and I know that the company has evolved. Initially started, everything was on you. Yeah. Your brand, your personal brand was bringing in the business. And I know it's evolved to a lot of your team members are bringing in their own work, filling their own work, running a 360 desk. How do you manage you still being a top biller plus mentoring, coaching, managing a whole other team?
Yeah. I think the first thing is like having a high performing team means that I probably do like 40-50% of my time recruiting. It might not sound like a lot, but that's quite a lot, right? For a business owner. Like I think that's probably more than most. And with that 40-50% of my time, I can do 600, 700K, 800K because of my network, because of just like my overall savviness and just like, I can kind of blag it and get it done. The second part is like I like work. I'm not 9-5. Like I can assure you I'm not a 9-to-5 guy. I'm a like 7 to 4, 6 to 9. Like I like doing my job. I'm on the road a lot. I spend a lot of time with, candidates, clients, doing speaking engagements. So there is no way that you could like, and I'm not going to say like there's plenty of people that are more successful than me. I wouldn't have the life that I could have, like that I have now if I was working 9-5. Like I work a lot and that's okay because I enjoy it and it's my business, right? Like, I should be the hardest working person here. I don't want to be that CEO who doesn't do anything and the team kind of hates them, but they have the Ferrari and whatever. Don't get me wrong. If I build this off my back in 10, 15 years and then I'm happy to be that CEO parachutes in. But like right now, while we're in the grind years, I want to grind harder than anybody else. That's so, so, so important. And that's exactly what, a leader and a founder of a scrappy, small, early stage recruitment company should be doing. Like, I think where my blind spots are actually like more on the strategic piece of like, okay, well, how do we get from 7 to 25 people? What does a business need to look like? What type of hires do we need to make? What does the org structure need to look like? I'm the scrappy 0 to 1 guy. I left my previous business because it was growing and it was going to be corporate, and those like big strategic fluffy stuff in my head is, I don't want to be spending too much time on that. But as the business is growing, I can tell you that we're missing some of that. And, I'm hiring and I'm getting coaching on some of the stuff that is in my blind spot. But ultimately, this stuff is important. But going back to the original question, like, I like my job. I have a really good team. Recruitment to me is still interesting. I love FaceTime with clients. I go to everything and it just, it helps me tenfold.
For all the recruiters that I watch online and where I work, but I also watch a lot of recruiters, I think you are spending more time with clients face to face than just about every other recruiter out there. Do you think that's making a difference?
Yes. And I think within my world, I found a world where people like and appreciate me and my style. And it's worked out beautifully for me in terms of the response that I have had since I've started doing a bunch of FaceTime. And I think, the reality is I'm an executive now. I'm speaking to other executives. I think we communicate on the same level. And, ultimately, I think having done that, like, I know, like, other agencies get scared when they're like, okay, Stu's going to see X or Y, like, okay, we're done here. And even my colleagues have started to see it. Like, if I bring Stu in, let him do his thing where he like holds court and let's, host a dinner and whatever. And that's my sweet spot. That's my domain. That's what I'm very good at. And so my colleagues have used that, like, hey, we're going to go down. Like, these guys want to meet us. Can you do this? And, the more they do it, like, Ross has been a great example, right? He's like, Stu, these guys want us to go to Chicago. Can you come? Like, absolutely, yes. We come back, 6 new engagements, another new client off the side of it, because that's where I'm good. And I honestly, like, You would hope so, right? I've been doing this a long time, but I don't want to be, I don't think I'm as compelling via email or via Slack or whatever. Like if I get out in front of people, I have like a more of a likability factor than perhaps I have in my written tone or even on the phone. But once I'm in front of people, like to me, it's game over. If I don't win, I'm shocked.
You've mentioned the word reputation about 5 or 6 times. You're probably one of the first people that have said that word on the podcast that many times. So why is reputation so important in your space, and how has it helped you?
I don't think this matters in every domain. Some domains are just so big that it doesn't matter. Like if you take software engineering, right? Like software engineering is every company, right? And this community is so big, and there's a new client every day spinning up building that you can piss people off into infinity, and it doesn't matter. The cybersecurity community is extremely unforgiving. It is a different beast in terms of they are professionally paranoid and they don't like to work with people they don't know and they don't trust. I've spent years building that. We call it social capital. We can call it reputation, whatever it may be. And that's why I'm like, personally, I won't go down the grad model of hiring, because I think like that volume, not really understanding your market, not really understanding what you're talking about, not really understanding the caliber or the people that you're talking to or what you're saying. Like that's, to me, that's reputational suicide. And, you know, this job is hard enough, but it's even harder when let's say 6 months ago, someone was sat in your seat with your territory and they sucked. And it's like, wow, we spoke to Jimmy or Hannah or Sandeep and we hated them. So you're done because you're affiliated with that brand. I never, ever, ever want that to happen to anyone from Hampton North. I've been on the other side of it and it's embarrassing. When you get a message back from somebody saying, hey, we dealt with the Hampton North guys 2 years ago and they sucked. Like there is no way we'd ever work with them again. Or, hey, like they ghosted us on a search. Like we're not interested in engaging them again. Like not for me. And, you know, the bigger you get, this is obviously harder to manage, but I see it so often where it's like, wow, like you hired that person, that is reputational suicide. And I would rather not hire people and just have the elite team that we have that are treating, you know, we say like honor the badge, right? Because if you're not treating it with respect, like to me, that's a huge, you know, if you're doing something that could be detrimental to me or to your colleagues moving forwards, like get out, you're not welcome there.
Absolutely love that. Well, I want to jump back into like the business lessons.
Yeah.
So you had an incredible first year.
Mm-hmm.
From year 1 to year 2, what do you think some of the biggest lessons that you learned?
I stepped away from the tools, I would say, too quickly. You know, so I'll kind of give you a timeline of where I think the boat started to rock for us in year 2. So we had a good, up until like last year was great. Like last year was great. We had a good January or February. And I was like, okay, like I'm going to get really strategic now. I'm going to start like building out websites and content, and you guys don't really need me at the minute. Like it's you know, we're cooking, you know, we went through a phase of doing over $200,000 month, which is where we were trying to be as a team of 6, kind of get to that, targeting 2.4 million. I think we were targeting 2.8. I think we're probably, you know, somewhere between 2.2 and 2.4 now. But, you know, ultimately things are good. I don't need to be in the field as much. And I did it too like soon. So I'd say from like March, April, May, I kind of took a step back too much. Some personal stuff where I was kind of in the business, kind of not. And it was actually, I should have, like if I look back, I was in the headspace that my team are good enough that if I had stepped away for a month, let them run with it. I do think the business, if I'm looking back on my own personal performance and situation, if I'd have stepped back for a month and let the team run it versus dealing with the stuff that I had to deal with, but then dipping backwards and forwards, almost like a skeleton of myself, but not allowing the team to flourish without me. If I could go back and do that again, I would have just taken the month of May out and come back June fresh. But I kind of stank the room out. If I'm looking back on my own leadership performance, I just wasn't in the right headspace to be doing what I needed to be doing. And I didn't trust the team enough. And that's a weakness on my end. But ultimately, I think, you know, I went off the tools too soon. We fell a little bit in love with our own noise. And it's really easy to do when everything is going really well. You're like, wow, we're crushing, you know, we're making money like this and things are great. So we don't have to work as hard, right? We're like, because, you know, everyone loves us and we're awesome. And, you know, the reality is I looked at our Q1 inputs and I looked at our Q2 inputs, and Q1 was close to double Q2. And guess what? We did double the numbers in Q1 as we did to Q2. Like, you know, you can coast. Even if you're really good, you can still slow down. You can still coast. And we just took our foot off the gas in terms of, I would say, the rigor and the consistency, and just we trusted the recruitment gods too much, and the recruitment gods do not fare well. Whereas, like, if you have 3 people at final, they really love 2 and 1 is okay, like, you're probably good. Versus, hey, we've got 1 person late in process. We like, fingers crossed. Guess how often fingers crossed comes in? It doesn't. Like, it rarely happens. And just like lazy old, stuff that everyone falls into the trap of. So we came back July 1st and, looked at what our expectations are as a business, who we're trying to be, what that takes, right? Because again, it doesn't matter if your reputation is wonderful. If you're not doing any work, like, I can't just have a really good reputation and play golf every day. Like, I have to still work hard, and so do the team. But, we've had a good kind of introspective look of who we are, why we're here, and I would say, like, our deal cycles are anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. And it's no surprise that August has been the best that we've had as a business. We still got 2 weeks left. There's a world where we double our best. We're kind of knocking on the door of a $400,000 or $500,000 a month, which for us, we were prior to that, our best was in the 2s. If we can do this month, I think, like, it will set us up very nicely for the rest of the year. It already has. But also just that, okay, well, we just absolutely went flat out. And I get that there has to be some balance. You can't go 110% every day of the year. It's impossible. And I know that you have to kind of manage workload on that. But this is what if you're all in, this is what it looks like. And I think that excitement and spark is back. And now it's like, okay, well, my job is now to not let those standards slip because, okay, well, I've got data based on, okay, well, if you're doing this is that bad quarter we had. If you're doing this is what it can look like. And so, again, going back to the point of how do you manage a remote team, all the information is there because, we're using I wouldn't say KPIs, but we're using our data of the work that we're doing the right way, using the database the right way so that we're able to predict future performance. And that's so important because then we know what's worth our time, what's not.
How are you tracking like the performance?
In terms of like on a granular, like daily, weekly
on a granular,
basis?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we use a CRM called Vincere. We set different weekly, usually our monthly and quarterly cadences look very similar, but weekly we basically do an assessment of where our desk is because most of our guys and girls are full desk. Like if we're very job rich, it's like, okay, we need to spend 80% of the week on delivery. We still need to be doing 20% on, business development outreach that never stops. If we're working on maybe 1 or 2 vacancies or they're lower quality vacancies, we switch that up. We're doing 80% business development, networking, LinkedIn outreach, etc. So I think like the reality is the weeks always look very different, but I think the months and the quarters end up looking collectively the same. But we're basically trying to kind of stay level against the roller coaster of recruitment of like, hey, had a really good month, but now I've got no jobs again because I did 4 deals. And so now I've got no vacancies because those clients don't need me anymore. And that's always happens, I think, for like, other than like, I would say like the top 1 to 2% of recruiters who are just like always busy and always have stuff on. They always know where their next, the deals are coming this month. They know what's coming in 30, 45 days because they've already kind of got those engagements in place and they know where the clients are coming from in the 90 days. Like that's a different level of like a lead recruiter. There's some that like can spin up new clients in a heartbeat. I've never been that person. I think for me, it's more, okay, well, I can predict based on conversations from 2 months ago, 5 months ago, who's going to be recruiting for me in October, who's coming in November, who's probably December's a little bit far away, but I can always see like 90 days out, what's coming when, and kind of manage my time and resources accordingly.
You just said that August is looking at being an absolute like double what you guys have ever done.
Yeah.
The June and July, did you guys like increase the work or was it just like
from July, there was more work, tighter rigor, more collaborative around like what projects we were working on, etc. We used to have every other Friday off. We call it Free Friday. Start from another company, fine. We parked that, like we're behind. You don't do good stuff when you're not playing well. So parked that for the quarter. We'll review that. And just the expectations went up. What was expected on a weekly basis, what was expected against every vacancy. And yeah, like the volume of activity was much higher. Not necessarily the hours that people worked, but more just the tighter focus, more meetings, more accountability. And that's what drove it forwards, right? As well as just the like, hey, like the thought of this company becoming a losing culture, like I won't have it. People know that. And, I don't want to say that I put the fear into the team, but like at some point you got to kind of show up, right? And we didn't show up for a couple of months. everyone can have a bad week, a few bad weeks. Like I get that, but like over a 6-8 week period to not be good enough is not good enough. And that puts you in a very precarious situation as an employee of like, hey, like if I'm going 60, 90 days without a placement, like I got to start thinking about it. But, again, if you want to buy yourself some credit, do an 80K month, do 150K month. And it's like, okay, like remind everyone the superstar that no one cares what you did in August of last year or December of last year or February or even like 2 weeks ago. No one cares. Recruitment forgets. Every time you do a deal, it resets, right? And that's it. Like, cool. Like, there's no point living. There's so many people in our industry that live former glories. I like, honestly, I've seen so many of them, and later years they'll bounce around agencies and tell everyone how good they used to be. And I joke about it when I say like, hey, I used to be good. Like, I'm still in this every single day, and like I'm still very tight on my own performances and what I'm doing and what I'm accountable for. There are plenty of people out there who do want to live off past glories. And again, like the second you've done a deal, like the clock resets on the first of every month, first of every week. Like, no one cares what you did last week. No one cares what you did last month. You have to go again because recruitment forgets.
I want to switch gears. And this is definitely for like the US listeners. Most of the people that listen to this podcast are based in the US. I think it's like 90%. So like, what is the difference between UK recruiting, US recruiting, and like, why did you want to build something different from like the UK structure?
From a viewpoint of what the industry is in the US versus the UK, I think it's a more respected profession in the US. In the UK, it is very much a like realtors and like very much, and I get a lot of hate for this, but I could care. 80 to 90% of people that go into the industry in the UK, somewhat uneducated, realize that it's a way to make a buck and don't necessarily treat the industry, but they know they can make a buck, so they'll do really well out of it. There is an arrogance about UK firms coming to the US that they think they do it better, which I think is bullshit. Like I genuinely don't agree with that viewpoint. I've been here for 10 years. Some of it, look, are there some wonderful recruiters in the UK? Of course there are, right? The best people I've ever met, the 7, 10, $12 million billers, right? I've met like 8-figure billers in the US. I've never met anyone like that in the UK. Like, to me, that is just so insane. And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry over here. So there's just a lot more. I think one of the biggest, like cultural differences is the split desk model is much more of a thing in the US than the UK. We run a little bit of a hybrid where we have some full desk folks and we have some delivery function, and it depends on job flow. But the split desk thing, and even, there's the traditional 360, which is very, very British, right? That kind of do everything, which again, if you're a solopreneur or kind of run on your own, you're a 360 person, you do everything. You have the 180 model, and even in the US, there's like 120, they call it, where it's account management, sales, and recruiting. So there's lots of different nuances of how to do it over here. Look, I think over here, the earning upside is insane. I think you can bill and also make millions of dollars in recruiting. And I've been it, I've lived it, and I have a much better standard and quality of life than I would have had in the UK had I applied myself in the very same way. Just because I think the level of opportunity and honestly just the US ethos around like excess and like huge opportunity, it's just, again, it's a capitalistic marketplace. And if you want more, you can go and get more and take more. And I like that. But it's I would say like it's a much more positive industry in the US in terms of how it's seen, how respected it is by clients. Look, not everyone loves us. Not everyone's going to love me. Not everyone's going to love you. The game is the game, and there's always going to be that argument of, TA versus exec search versus contingent recruiter. It happens in every country, it happens in every industry, right? And that's just always going to be a thing. But, ultimately, I just think there is a lot more opportunity out here. And I think, again, it's a much more respected profession versus, if I look at how many agencies there are in the UK, the caliber of people that are coming into the business and how qualified they are. And again, there's zero barrier to entry to this industry as it is, which is often talked about, pros and cons either way. But there's plenty of businesses. And I think like that grad shop model of like, okay, let's just get our name out there and spray like that, requires a lot of like traditionally lower paid, high volume activity, and 1 out of 20 make it. And that's really just, it's a sad story. And I would guess like in agency recruiting, maybe 1 in 100 are still around after 10 years. I would like that, if you look at the grad crops from the Hayes and the tech systems and, the aerotechs, like maybe 1 in 100 stick around in this industry long enough, but I would guess maybe less.
Oh, it's bad. I started in aerotech myself.
Yeah, we always start in a shop like that, right? Everyone has their stories.
I got 2 questions before we jump over to the quickfire questions. First of all, like once again, you give a shit about respect for your organization, but you're also doing something that most other recruiting companies have not done. Like you've brought on industry advisors.
Yes.
Or an industry advisor. Why did you do that? And how does that set you apart from being different from everyone else?
So I think the first thing is it's always good to have a canary on the pulse of your reputation, right? I've obviously mentioned reputation 7 or 8 times. My view on reputation could be very, like, I could have these rose-tinted glasses and in the corporate Slack channels or or like at the events, it could be like, shirts full of shit, right? Like, we don't like it. If I have somebody on the inside who is validating that my content and my output and the quality of my work is first class in like a very, very respected, like we're not talking about a guy, we're talking about the first CISO at Reddit, the chief security officer at Slack, like very well respected person within my industry and respected by his peers as well. So, and then like when we're spitballing ideas, right? Like I'm looking at, okay, well, what can make us different? What can make us more interesting? And there are some things that, will be coming as an add-on to who we are, but around the core of hiring, like who better to spitball from someone who actually would see value in the product and can be like beta test without my needing to angle. And I think like having somebody who I can bounce ideas off. And look, the third reason is it looked great, right? If I speak to people and they're like, okay, well, what do you do differently? I'm like, okay, well, I have one of the most respected chief security leaders on the planet that gives us advice and is, has attached themselves to me and to our brand, which is unheard of. Like at that, I know some people do it, but of his caliber and level, like I don't know that there is a bigger security leader in the industry attached to a staffing company. I would doubt it. And it is just a huge tick to our box that somebody like that, and somebody who I like and respect as a person, trust me enough to put their brand against me.
How'd you even have that conversation? Like, how'd you get them on board for something like that? Because like you don't see this in the staffing industry.
So he's a US person, but he actually relocated to the UK and he was finding a new job out there and we were talking about some things and he was giving a lot of advice to me, which again, we've worked together a couple of times. We had some, great memories together as well, but he started to give a lot of advice. And I was like, if you genuinely like buy into this and you think that we can do something here, I would love to make this a little bit more official. And then, we can make it kind of work for both sides. Not that I don't appreciate the free advice, which is wonderful, but I think like I valued it very much. And so I actually kind of said like, hey, well, why don't you come on an official capacity? He's a voice sounding board to the team. He'll come to our holiday party. He's, super useful for us as a teammate. And that's so important. But I didn't want stuff for free, even though I appreciate it. And, if somebody's that forthcoming, if they want to come on a journey with us and take us somewhere potentially amazing, they should absolutely get theirs.
That's awesome. And my last question before going to the quick fire is, you launched your company right when you had a baby.
Yeah.
How did you, having a newborn and having your young family is time intensive.
Yes.
For somebody else out there, like what's the advice that you have for, people that have a new family while still trying to build a company, be a top biller, run a team?
Yeah. It's tough, right? I probably didn't nail the time in. I have a mega supportive partner, which I do. My wife is a wonderful teammate. And so that's so important. She gets it. She understands the bigger picture. There's some good upside for her as well in life going well for us. And so she gets it, right? And it's not like I was ever a 40-hour-a-week person at my previous company anyway. So it wasn't like a huge uptick. Candidly, I burnt hobbies for a little bit. I know it's, it is the nature of the beast, but I wasn't super social for a while. I did what I could, but the priorities were the baby and the business and my marriage. And even like candidly, the marriage stuff was something that took some time as well, right? Like honestly, having a business, having a new baby, it was like, wow, there are all these new things. And I felt like my wife and I for a little while, and anyone who's maybe in this situation with young kids, sometimes you're like ships passing in the night and that takes work. And that's something that, you have to focus on. And I think we're kind of back where we wanted to be. But in those early months, that was difficult. But again, like full support from her, which is super useful. The second is, and I think in the early days, particularly when you're on your own, you can't complete recruitment. So most staff can wait. Again, I'm not saying work 20-hour weeks, but create healthy boundaries, either go to an office or set time when you're going to shut your laptop, because you can go till 11 o'clock every night, wake up, open your laptop at 7 and just go again, spend a little bit of time with baby overnight and just fall into this like repeat. You actually lose productivity because you just go onto autopilot and it's all a bit of a blur. So set really clear and healthy boundaries of when you have time for the family. Let them know that, hey, we're going to go to the playground at 5 till 6. Then I have to go back online. This is what I need to do. But communicate those gaps with your family so that you can get some time, whether it's in the day, whether it's at the end of the day. I always protected bath and bedtime. Like that has never been a time that you can book out in my calendar from 3 months to now she's 2.5. Like that was always been a time where if I get nothing in the day, I get that.
Oh, awesome. So jumping over the quick fire questions, they do not need to be quick answers.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to a brand new recruiter that's getting started in our wonderful world this year to succeed?
Yep. Treat people like you're going to run into them in 10 years' time. It's essentially, if you treat people like a commodity, then you'll get the exact same respect in return. If you treat someone like they're going to be a client in 10 years, you'll just have a much better experience with that person. The second thing is work with an agency that shares that mantra. If they just want you to go bang, 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 bang and not care about the people, you're going to find it really difficult to make a career out of this. You're going to be changing industries every year in this game. Like one industry, longevity is absolutely your friend.
Same question, but for people that have been around the block 5, 10, 20 years, what advice would you give to them to see success?
I think like at this point, you should know what you're good at and double down on that. I think there's this obsession about being this like super well-rounded recruiter, and you don't have to be, right? You can be a bad cold caller and still be a good recruiter. You can be like unbelievable. You can be a bad specker, right? You might not be good at specs, but do what you're good at, whether it's creating communities, whether that's hosting podcasts, whether that's specking, whether that's creative texting, whether you're really good in person and you can go to an event. Double down on what you're good at. Stop trying to be okay at everything, like, because then you just get left behind, because there will be someone better than you at every cog if you do every cog. So just make sure that you double down on the thing that you're great at.
Like, I know in some other podcasts you talked about like not being the best in the cold calling. Is that why you doubled down on LinkedIn?
LinkedIn and in person, yes.
Because I think you mentioned it was just like, always looking for a shortcut. Most recruiters are, but you found a shortcut that works for you and you just went, boom.
Yeah. and why would I not, right? If it works, like keep going until it doesn't, right? If you find a money hole, don't go and look for another money hole. Just keep taking from it. Keep taking from it until it runs out. You don't need 2. You don't need 5. Like if you find a money hole, keep taking the money out of it. Stop worrying that there might be more elsewhere.
Has there been a book that has had a huge impact on your career and business?
Yes, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I think, is a classic. I think it really allows you to, figure out what you want to do and who you want to be, but also understand the psychology of why people act the way that they act in. I think what you realize when you take a step back is a lot of recruiters are very selfish. A lot of people are doing things to get something back and they don't really see the psychology of what's happening at the other end. A lot of people, like, I'll give you an example, right? Let's say it was a verbal offer that went out on Thursday, right? Like last Thursday, didn't go, verbally accepted, whatever. On Monday, like recruiters getting really stressed about it, right? Like, I might get the offer, because that's how they've been trained. The client candidate don't give a shit. Like they're fine. Like no one's in a rush. It's the recruiter is making it about them. And that's because they're coached, the time kills all deals and whatever. If you start using language like ASAP or whatever, it's really only for you, right? You're doing it for yourself. And that never works. Like in the reality of being really successful in our industry is never about us. Like it's actually never, ever, ever about us. It's about connecting 2 people or more than 2 people and getting out the way. Like, and that's, obviously you want to give them a great journey and that experience and really kind of velvet glove that. But I think we never really understand the psychology of why people respond the way they respond. And I think the 7 habits really gets it under the hood of like, okay, well, I'm doing this, but like I'm interpreting the world in a very different way. And everyone interprets the written word, the spoken word, the pictures in such a different way. If you don't understand that, like you're really going to struggle to connect with people.
You've made a ton of placements and you're really good at the personal connection.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite placement story?
Yeah, there's a couple. One is, I think this was like a week before COVID as well. So there's a guy who was desperate for, like, really wanted this job down in Costa Mesa. I was living in LA, down in Costa Mesa, and his bike broke down the night before. And he's like, hey, I got to dip out. I was like, dude, I think there's a pandemic coming. Like, I'm serious. So I drove him to I did a 120-mile round trip, drove him to the interview, walked in, said hey to the CISO, somebody I know well, sat basically in the lobby, talking to the receptionist for like 4 hours, drove him back, got the job. I thought that was a pretty sweet one. And then there's a couple of examples of people in my industry not necessarily hiring, but complaining about a problem. Like, okay, well, as an example, we're spending too much time and money automating questionnaires or whatever. It actually did make more sense. Okay, well, I know somebody who can do that and build you a system to do it whilst also doing it themselves. So I've created placements out of conversations like, hey, speak to Andy, speak to Jeff, speak to Helen. They can fix that for you. So I think there's I love it when you basically create a placement when there's nothing there. And it's just a really, really good feeling. And then look, I have a couple of situations where I'll pick it like a perm job up in the morning, like, hey, I need you to speak to, I know someone for that. I'll set up a slate of interviews and on same day. It's happened 4 or 5 times in my career where it's like, hey, know the person, stay on the line. I'm going to call them while you're on the line, see if they're interested. I'm going to get you on a slate of interviews and we'll get them to start Monday. Those ones are sick as well. It rarely happens, but if you know your market and you're like, okay, I need them to speak to Hamid or whatever, speak to them. I'll get them on the line today. We'll get this done by end of day. Those ones are always nice.
That's an absolute power move. I absolutely love that. So you've been a 7-figure biller even before you started your own business. You're crushing it with your own business. You've attracted such a talented team of high performers. At your core, what do you think has been the reason why you're seeing success out there?
These are two, probably not the most altruistic answers, but some of it is spite. There's a couple of people along the way that have told me that I'm a fad and it's never going to work out. And some of it is, the chip on the shoulder thing of hey, watch this. And then some of it is just I was always a fairly decent athlete without not being massively naturally athletic because I'm very competitive and I hated to lose. And I think, there's always that argument, love to win, hate to lose, right? I'm a hate to lose person. And I think it just spurs me on. And I think, add to that, I'm a provider for my wife and daughter. I went through the phase of liking materialistic things. Not that I don't like nice stuff now, but I think in the earlier days, it was to get the Porsche and the apartment and whatever. And I've been through that. And I will say that stuff runs out. It goes thin quite quickly. And now it's more okay, well, I want to buy back time, but I also really want to enjoy this. And I think the more I enjoy it, ironically, the more success I have, because when I'm doing this with a smile on my face, working with clients that I like and candidates that I want to do well with, and also my team is high performing, and everyone I think at my level has hired somebody or been given a grad or whatever, and you're this person is just an idiot, and it's just or I can't stand this person, but I can't work with them. Well, they're on another team and they just drive me crazy. I don't have that because it's my company, right? And so it makes me so happy that I get to enjoy the people that I deal with on a daily basis, and I get to create that, right? And it's not, I'm not just going to hire a bunch of people that I like because it's my hangout, but I want to work with a bunch of people that I respect, and I get to control that destiny. In terms of the root of the success, it's been a lot of hard work. It's been a lot of fear of failure. It's been a lot of, pushing things through. But I also don't want to let anybody down. I still, again, family, but even when I'm taking a job brief, right? I like these people that I'm working with. I never want to let them down. I never want to let the candidates down. Never want to let my team down. And there's times where I'll Superman a moment to kind of get things going again. But, I've always kind of taken that mantra on my shoulder of bleed from the front and be the guy.
Absolutely love that. And I know that you've had hard days. 2024 has also been tough for you personally. Yeah. How do you get through some of those hard days as a recruiter and get out of that funk?
I always say, whenever I have a bad day, it's just recruitment, right? The majority of my job is getting quite wealthy people, slightly wealthy. I know it sounds I'm not outside job centers or whatever, getting people their first job. It's not as altruistic. Recruitment is never as altruistic and as, love and softy as people from the outside seem to think it is. We're not helping people get jobs. We're attracting really high caliber talent and making corporations do better, which I'm okay with. But if I have a bad day or a bad week, the reality is, no one's life has been ruined. Nothing is in that situation where the stakes are that high. And look, the reality is, I stay very emotionally flat. You'll never see me like fist bumping or cheering or whatever, because I know this game, the reality is like, if you look at it from a very far distance, it's always just a little bit up. Realistically, it is like that, like the highs, lows, highs, lows, highs, lows. If you let your, like, and this is, I think, more of a junior thing to do, but some people never lose this. If you go up with the highs and down with the lows too often, like, recruitment will beat the crap out of you, because it is a very, very tough industry, and you'll get a lot of rejection and you'll give a lot of rejection. And it's really, really, you've got to be really thick-skinned and ready to do that and take the emotion out of it. So I think, like, on the tough days, from a business perspective, look, try and remain as emotionally level as I can. I'm not a hothead. I used to be a big hothead when I was younger. I didn't achieve anything. You know, the reality is you can control what you can control. Our job is so weird in that there is so much that we can't control, which is really difficult for me, because I do love to be in control of things. But I can't change if the candidate's husband decides that he doesn't want to relocate to, you know, Denver at the last minute, or, you know, I can't change the fact that, you know, a client's insurance doesn't cover one very specific doctor. That, you know, there's always, everyone's got weird stories of why things haven't worked out. If I've done everything that I can in my power to make connections and get stuff going, great. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And I always say, like, I have some boring cliches at work, but trust the process is like one of my, like, team will hear it till the cows come home. But whenever I have bad days, everything will be fine.
Awesome. And now, because of, like, you showing up on podcasts, you constantly posting on LinkedIn, I'm sure you have recruiters that reach out to you.
Yes.
Like, asking for help or asking for advice. Is there a question that you wish they would actually ask, and what would be the answer to that?
That's a good question. First answer to your question, while in the background I think about this, is never call me to pick my brain. I'm a business owner. I'm a family man. I'm trying to do the best for my clients and my team. Like, just grabbing 30 minutes with no context is actually quite disrespectful. And I know there's a lot of outspoken recruiters who say very similar things. We're real busy people. Look, I'm happy to give kind of answers based on where I've been successful, and I'm happy to kind of share, like, draw on things previously. Again, like, if someone was to ask me, like, how I got such a large following on LinkedIn, what kind of numbers I get from the back of it, what they suggest in terms of, like, creating a social media platform, or why I chose cybersecurity. If it's a punchy question, there's not, like, one particular one. I think, look, a lot of recruiters, and why I'm probably followed by a lot of recruiters, is because of my social media presence. I don't really care about the cybersecurity thing, which is fine. But I think that if they were going to ask a question and get to the point, it'd probably be one specific to that.
Love that. And this is the last question. We're going to ask this two different ways. We're going to ask this at the very beginning of your recruiting career.
Yeah.
Once again, at the start of Hampton North. Like, you've had tons of ups, tons of downs, tons of success.
Yeah.
Lots of, like, hard lessons. If you can go back to the very beginning of your recruiting career and give yourself advice, what would you tell yourself?
Trust the process. If I could change one thing, I would have actually gone to a bigger company that is arguably harder and tougher culturally, but, like, some of those what feel like terrible companies have the best training in the world. And, like, I don't think that my foundational training was great, and I had to figure it out, which is why I had this, like, career renaissance at, like, 26, whereas I see some folks at, like, 22, 23 crush. So I think if I could change one thing, it would be, you know, I chased the base a little bit. I got a little bit higher of a base. I should have gone to a business that gave me a really, really solid fundamental training with a huge kind of plethora of high performers that I can follow in maybe a larger office. I went boutique early on and kind of scrapped around. So I think understand early in your career, like, who am I learning from and what am I learning? I know this is a really privileged position to say this, but the first 18 months of your career in recruiting, 2 years, I don't want to say what you make doesn't matter because you have bills to pay. But if you get that right, you can make, like, legitimately 10 to 20 times that amount if you get it right in 5 years versus chasing an extra 2K, 4K, 6K on the basement, 10K. Like, and again, position of privilege, right? And I realize that I'm saying that because not everyone's situation is conducive to be able to do this. But if you get the training right, like, you can legitimately in 3-5 years make 250 grand, make 400 grand, like, versus having to, like, piecemeal it along the way, which is how I did it.
And the same question, but looking at the very beginning of Hampton North.
Yeah.
Everything that you've gone through, the hiring, the success, the late nights, the freaking out about the money.
Yeah.
If you could give yourself advice, what would you give yourself?
Delegate early. whether that's hiring outside. I shouldn't be spending 2 hours reading contracts or going through video editing or booking flights. Like this stuff that I was doing that I could get somebody to do for like 10, 15 bucks an hour when I look at how I view my time, or like delegating certain things to team members who enjoy it and feel responsible, like do that. I reckon I'd probably set fire to 500 hours, like at least, right? Which is 6 months worth of work on stuff that's worth like 20 bucks an hour, so 10 grand. Whereas if I'd have made one placement in that time, if I'd have just hired somebody to do it or delegated, like absolutely that's probably the biggest thing. Like done. And there's so much stuff that I hate doing as a business founder. A lot of it is admin based, and I do it, and I would do it like, and it's my business, and I'm making myself miserable, like redlining documents and stuff like that. It was stupid.
Well, before I let you go, if anybody wants to follow you, how do they go about doing that?
I live on LinkedIn, so that's the best place for me. I'm sure you'll drop it in the comments, and yeah, Stuart Mitchell on LinkedIn. I'll definitely be the first person that comes up under that name.
And before I let you go, is there anything else that you would love to share with the listeners?
I think the biggest thing is to, as someone who like has learned this along the way, you're probably never as bad as you think you are, and you're probably never as good as you think you are. A lot of it will be the industry will always ebb and flow. Stay humble when things are good and double down when things are bad. Everything will always be okay as long as you keep pushing it.
Well, Stuart, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. I've been looking forward to this interview for a while. Like, you've built an absolute team of killers, high performers in an industry that's had its, like, I want to almost say like its downs recently.
Yeah.
And you're still like out there absolutely like, crushing it with your team. So, I know there's a ton of lessons here that recruiters could take home, and I hope they did. And for the listeners, I hope you make 2024 your best year yet. Keep crushing it, guys.